Before I begin, I would like to take a moment to talk briefly about USCIRF and the work we do in promoting the universal right to freedom of religion or belief around the world. Created in 1998, International Religious Freedom Act, by the International Religious Freedom Act, USCIRF uses international human rights standards to monitor religious freedom globally and makes recommendations to the President, the Secretary of State, and Congress. USCIRF is an independent bipartisan commission. Commissioners are appointed by the President and the Republican and Democratic leadership of the House and the Senate. USCIRF issues an annual report each year, which contains information on religious freedom conditions within specific countries and policy recommendations to the U.S. government to address these concerns. The annual report specifically covers countries that USCIRF recommends that the State Department either designate as a country of particular concern or a CPC, or to include on the special watch list. Under IRFA, countries of particular concern are those countries whose governments engage in or tolerate systematic, ongoing, or egregious violations of religious freedom. Our 2021 annual report, which can be found on our website at uscirf.gov, covers 26 countries in detail. This year, for the second year in a row, USCIRF has recommended that the State Department designate India as a CPC. We also recommend that the United States advance human rights of all religious communities and promote religious freedom and dignity and interfaith dialogue through bilateral and multilateral forums and agreements. Pursuant to this recommendation, when President Biden meets with Prime Minister Modi, we urge him to raise some of the key concerns that led to our CPC recommendation for India. As the essential issue to be raised in the meeting is the Discriminatory Citizenship Amendment Act, or the CAA. While the CAA is said to benefit religious minorities, including Christians, Hindus, and Sikhs, from neighboring Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan, the reality is that the CAA, in conjunction with the proposed National Register of Citizens, or the NRC, requiring all residents to provide documentation of citizenship, may subject Muslims to statelessness, deportation, or prolonged detention. The CAA on its face singles out Muslims and denies them a path to citizenship afforded to persons of all other faiths. The CAA's stated purpose is to protect individuals facing religious persecution in India's neighboring countries. Yet it excludes Hindus persecuted and displaced in neighboring countries like Burma, where more than 400 Hindus live in segregation and unfathomable conditions in the Rohingya camps, and Muslim communities facing persecution, such as the Ahmadis in Pakistan or Shia Muslims in Afghanistan. An alternate to enacting the CAA that would better help the purpose would have been to simply ask those seeking citizenship whether they had faced persecution and to fast track those applicants who said they had. The CAA is significantly more worrisome when coupled with the potential nationwide NRC, which national leaders of the ruling BJP are pushing for. The fear is that the CAA, in conjunction with the planned National Population Register, the National Register of Citizens, could result in a wide-scale disenfranchisement of Indian Muslims. This would leave them vulnerable to prolonged detention, deportation, and violence. We saw this process play out in the northeast state of Assam, documented by Dr. Chatterjee's groundbreaking report, where a statewide registry was claimed as a mechanism for identifying migrants in the region. Many Indian citizens, in particular Muslims, have had their citizenship questioned and challenged by local authorities and have been excluded from the NRC despite their families having lived in India for generations. Given that the CAA only provides a pathway to citizenship for non-Muslims, the concern is that Muslims excluded by the NRC will have no recourse. A number of Indian Muslim citizens fear being sent to government-built detention camps and effectively rendered stateless in their own country. I recently spoke on an episode of USCIRF's Spotlight podcast regarding this report and our shared concerns regarding the situation in Assam. And I invite all who are interested to listen to this episode. As I discussed on the podcast, implementation of the nationwide NRC with the CAA in place potentially exposes millions of Indians, largely Muslims, to detention, deportation, and statelessness. The ongoing and planned use and construction of detention centers around the country is another troubling development. Reports suggest that there are 13 operational detention camps in India, with 6 of them alone in the state of Assam. Over the past year, Indians of all faiths have been exercising their peaceful right of protest to express their opposition to the CAA and related developments. Yet since its passage, we've seen a deadly crackdown by government authorities against those protesters, journalists, and advocates, and communal violence targeting Muslim communities, including Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, and Assam, where mob violence, at times with no intervention by the police, has resulted in death, beatings, and the burning of Muslims and Hindus. Another area of ongoing concern that we urge President Biden to discuss with Prime Minister Modi is the spread of online speech, hate speech, and false information against religious minorities. USCIRF's October 2020 hearing on combating online hate speech and disinformation targeting religious communities addressed the rise of hate and disinformation online in countries around the world, including India. Government officials and societal actors continue to spread fear amidst and disinformation against religious minorities, including Dalits, Christians, Sikhs, Muslims. As one example, India is Facebook's biggest market, and its messenger service WhatsApp continues to be used to target and facilitate violence against India's religious minorities, and that too during COVID. The concerns about the targeting of religious minorities extends across social and more traditional media platforms. We've also heard reports that civil society journalists and advocates who are documenting religious violence are also being targeted as well. The rise of hate and the targeting of religious minorities is of even deeper concern, given the additional restrictions on civil society. The September 2020 amendment to the Financial Contributions Regulation Act, or the FCRA, passed by the Indian Parliament, introduces additional guidelines, including extensive reporting requirements on NGOs, and expands the government's ability to restrict their lawful activities. These changes have had a chilling effect on NGOs, including those combating religious persecution and violence, and providing vital health and education services to religious minority communities. The closure of Amnesty International's Indian office is just one example of those increased restrictions on civil society. We're also concerned about the ongoing restrictions impacting religious freedom in Jammu and Kashmir. After the removal of Muslim-majority Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy in August of 2019, through the removal of Article 370 of the Constitution, government restrictions within the state on the internet, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of movement has severely restricted religious freedom. President Biden should also raise concerns regarding the continued enforcement of anti-cow slaughter and anti-conversion laws. 21 of 28 Indian states criminalize cow slaughter in various forms. These laws are often enforced against religious minorities, including Christians, Muslims, Dalits, and Awadis communities under the guise of protecting cattle. 10 Indian states possess anti-conversion laws prohibiting religious conversion based on force, allurement, inducement, or fraud. However, some contain such broad definitions that they can be interpreted as prohibiting any kind of conversion, whether consensual or not. These laws are predominantly used to arrest Christians and Muslims. Government actions, including the continued enforcement of cow slaughter and anti-conversion laws, has also created a culture of impunity for nationwide campaigns of harassment and violence against religious minorities, including mob lynchings against individuals suspected of cow slaughter and Muslims and Christians accused of conversion activities. The recent death of 84-year-old Jesuit priest Father Stan Swami, as we heard earlier, while in pre-trial detention, points to the growing harassment and imprisonment of individuals who do not share the same ideology as the government. Individuals who try to bring awareness of India's rich history of pluralism and attempt to draw attention to the need for tolerance find their efforts thwarted. Throughout the country, political and community leaders are promulgated an ideology that suggests that to be Indian is necessary to be Hindu, and views India's religious minorities as subordinate or foreign. That ideology has taken root in policies and actions at the state level, and increasingly in proposals and appeals at the national level that are resulting in the persecution and targeting of religious minorities. In our 2020 annual report, we made several recommendations to the US government to improve religious freedom conditions in India. In addition to the recommendations that I've already mentioned regarding the CPC designation and raising religious freedom concerns in bilateral and multilateral forums, we've also recommended that targeted sanctions be imposed on government officials and entities responsible for severe violations of religious freedom by freezing those individuals or entities' assets and barring their entry into the United States. We also urge the United States government to publicly condemn ongoing religious freedom violations in India and come to the aid of religious organizations and human rights groups being targeted for their advocacy of religious freedom. And finally, we ask the United States Congress to continue to raise religious freedom concerns in their US-India bilateral relationships and highlight concerns through hearings, briefing, letters, and visiting congressional delegations. USCIRF will continue to raise the alarm regarding the ongoing religious freedom violations in India and advocate for the implementation of these recommendations. Thank you again for inviting me to speak today.